There we go. Okay.
Okay, so thank you everybody for the warm welcome, and thank you for those of you who are joining us tonight. Let me just share my screen. So our presentation is titled Little Odessa by the Sea. We're going to talk about where this name comes from, and obviously more interestingly through food. Um, so first off, I just wanted to talk a little bit about why I chose this topic, how I came to this topic, considering I'm not from New York City. I did not grow up anywhere near Brighton Beach. So right in Colorado, which is where I'm from, we have maybe, one or two Russian stores, and we have one Russian restaurant. But I had always heard of Brighton Beach, right? It was kind of this infamous area, for better or for worse, of an whole area where, right, there was all these Russian speaking stores and a large community. And funny enough, I did not go to Brighton Beach the first time until I was in grad school. And Sam, which is with us here, we went together to Brighton Beach the first time ever. And I think the one thing that, really, really stayed with me, and something that anyone, goes to is you remember the food, the smells, the sights. And when I was in grad school, I wrote one of my papers on Brighton Beach because I felt that there was not enough written about the history of this area, where it came from, how it's developing, right? And it's a very fascinating place, because we'll see, it's constantly changing, and it's filled with entrepreneurship, filled with so many stories, and you don't even feel like you're in New York when you're there. I took one of my friends there a couple weeks ago, and she said it's crazy that this is from, right. You take right, the queue from Manhattan, and you're in a completely different land. So some questions that I set for myself and when I was doing my research in grad school and for tonight's presentation that I wanted to answer from this question: what is so special about Brighton Beach and its food anyways? So the first question I wanted to ask is, one, how do we get this enclave filled with a very Russian-speaking population, right? Whose idea was it to design this place? Whose idea was it to create this enclave that continues to keep on going? Then specifically, right, for food, how did the residents of Brighton Beach connect back to their culture through food? And right when I was giving this idea for a presentation, everybody said, oh, it's just so fitting that you're doing this on food, considering the last one we did was on the Jewish delicatessen. And then some other questions. How did this area help Soviet Jewish immigrants survive and thrive in the United States, which is something we will see happen? And four, what is the future of Brighton Beach? Will it ever lose this Russian-speaking character? Will it assimilate? What will happen? Something that's interesting about this research is it was very, very difficult for me to find many sources when I was in grad school. And now, really, there's not much out about the history of Brighton Beach. So mostly what I found was journalists, specifically a lot of journalists from the New York Times who were found out about this area and started to go there and write about what they were seeing. And then there is, of course, some information from NYANA, the New York Association for New Immigrants, or sorry, New Americans. And then there are some, Brooklyn kind of archives that talk about the area in general. So from this background, let's kind of dive in. Let's ask these questions and write some things, some maybe not so good, maybe very good, and then kind of bad or scandalous all about this enclave. So first off, right, for those of you who may know Brighton Beach or who may live there, or go there on a daily basis, I thought it would be kind of interesting as someone who's a bit of an outsider, kind of looking in, where does the name even Brighton Beach come from, and who was the first to kind of start and develop this area? So I went back to the 1860s. So on the picture on the left here, you actually have Brighton Beach in England. Funny enough, I had been to Brighton when I was 20 years old in England, but before I ever went to Brighton Beach in New York City. What and I mean, is it similar? Maybe a little bit. Maybe the only thing that you can really see that's similar is right there's an amusement park. But the beach is different. It has a lot of rocks. But this is the original, the real, I guess, Brighton Beach. And right, if you still go to this day, you go to Google and you Google Brighton Beach, you still might very much get this one in England. So it was named after Brighton Beach by British troops who were stationed in Coney Island during the American Revolution, and they reminded them of Brighton. Um, so obviously there's a beach there, and in the late 1800s, there was this hope that this would be a great part for tourism and a place where New Yorkers would come to have an escape from the everyday heat. So this man by the name of William Ingeman, a native New Yorker who made his fortune selling mules during the Civil War, he arrived there and he had a lot of money to spend. So that's what he wanted to do, is he wanted to start building up hotels and right, I guess make a resort area in this area. So he worked with real estate broker William Stillwell. And for those of you who live in New York, Stillwell is probably a name you recognize from the subway station, right? The last stop in the queue is Stillwell. So they got together and they built this hotel, which you see on the right. This was called the Ocean Hotel, right in Brooklyn Beach. And Stillwell and Ingman, they built it together in 1870. It opened. And they would, go on to build the pier and an aquarium, and later a boardwalk in the 1920s and certain other attractions. So that was really the first history. Nothing Jewish so far, nothing Jewish yet. And right, how are you going to get all those people there, and how are you going to make it easy for people to come from New York City? They're going to build a railroad. So that was the railroad that came to Brighton Beach, which was built in the late 1800s to help bring more tourists. So who was this, hotel in this area catered for? At this point, it's very important to mention, as this will later become a very Jewish area, Jews were not allowed in any of the premises. This was a hotel that was catered to the upper middle class. It was a luxury facility, as you can see in the pictures. What could you find there? A florist shop, an ice cream parlor. You could play cards, billiards. Betting was legal in New York City at this time. You could go and send someone a telegraph. There was a ballroom. You had to dress up. People rode in on their horsebacks and racetracks, and there was a concert hall. So it was, yeah, a very luxurious, nice place. So if you're asking yourself where's the legacy of any of this in Brighton Beach, here you go. Mother Nature. So right, if you live in this area, you would know that right, this area is very much prone to awful hurricanes. So a lot of natural disasters led to the decline and the demise of this hotel. So we had storms, hurricanes, floods, natural disasters, fires, you name it. We did not really have great technology. Right in late 1800s, early 1900s, not the best technology. Only one reliable locomotive at the time. Maintenance and management of this hotels led this hotel into extreme debt. And by this time, there's a lot of competition because on the west of Brighton, right, where Coney Island is now, they were building an amusement park, which was competing with the hotels. And then another thing that really led to this demise is by 1907, it became illegal to bet, which led to a huge decline of the hotels. And so by 1924, the Brighton Beach Hotel was torn down, and along with the music hall, and as you can see, big storm was washing it away. So this is the very short history of the first burst of entrepreneurship that we're going to see continue to hit Brighton Beach. Okay, so now if you're asking me where does this Jewish change come from, as Brighton Beach would become, and maybe to this day still is, a very Jewish area, as Jews were not even, allowed at all in Brighton Beach. So everything you saw, all this beautiful luxury facility, Jews were not allowed in. So since they said, okay, fine, if we're not allowed in, we're gonna build our own. So they started to build bungalows, colonies, and boarding houses for the Jewish population. Right, because you saw they built a railroad, so it was very cheap and easy to get there. So Jews from New York, they started to come there for the summer, right? It was a beach, it's less hot there. And they had their own bathing clubs. And right, if you were with us for the Jewish delicatessen, when you have a movement of the Jews, they bring their own businesses and their own entrepreneurship with them. So they brought kosher shops, butchers, and of course, synagogues. And by the 1920s, there's a huge migration of Jews who are coming from the Lower East Side, right, from the tenements and a very overcrowded area, who are moving to Brighton Beach because they find out it's a very cheap area to live in, and there's a lot of entrepreneurship. So by the 1920s, they're building 30 new multi-level buildings. And the area becomes quite prosperous after all this hotel was torn down and everything is declined, and you see there's already a boardwalk. Now what does happen? Going back, during the Great Depression in 1929, this does hit Brighton Beach very hard, and the land became very cheap, and became so cheap that so many people from the Lower East Side started fleeing there, and it once became like a slum, just like in the Lower East Side. And those who had started to make a fortune or started to rise up in society, we see the first movement of them moving to the suburbs, moving to other boroughs. And we see a new movement of immigrants coming in from Europe who are fleeing World War II, specifically Jews from Germany, who find out about Brighton Beach, that it's a cheap place to live with a large Jewish population. So this is our first movement we're going to see of immigrants. So we're going to see many, many times one movement that moves in, starts the entrepreneurship, and then another movement that moves in that maybe finds out about that other Jewish movement and thinks, oh, there's cheap land, there's already Jews. And with these two mixes of social class, one social class is going to move out, while a new social class moves in. And this is something we're going to see over and over and over. So by World War II, just a general statistic, 9% of the United States population is going to go fight overseas. Brighton Beach is included in this and very affected. So by World War II, any Jews who come back to Brighton Beach, they find once more an area that has been very dilapidated, torn down during the war, and a lot of these war veterans, they have new benefits. They do not want to live in Brighton Beach, right? They can start to form their own houses in the suburbs. So once again, there is an exodus of Jews moving up the, social class and saying, we don't want to live here anymore. This area has been torn down while we were gone. And then again, who's our new movement moving into Brighton Beach by the 1940s? So after the Holocaust, there is a very large movement of Jews who had survived the Holocaust, moving to Brighton Beach. Once again, they hear that there is an area that has already a lot of established synagogues, a Jewish presence, and the area is cheap. And this is where NYANA starts to come in. So for those of you who know NYANA, the New York Association of New Americans, they think, again, it's a great place to put these Jewish refugees. So most come from the large industrial towns and cities of Poland. So we have Jews survivors from Vilna, Lodz, Krakow, and Warsaw. Smaller numbers from Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Germany. And right, they find an area that's dilapidated. And at the same time, they see a huge opportunity, just like many other generations of people who had come to Brighton Beach before. Right, these people need jobs. They're in a new land, and they make shops that cater to themselves. So once again, Brighton Beach is hit with another burst of entrepreneurship. So these Holocaust survivors open tailor shops, glazers, bakeries, modern clothing stores, bookstores, household goods, all can be found on Brighton Beach Avenue, replacing shopkeepers and store owners of earlier decades, many who retired or moved with their kids moved out to the suburbs. And this was one of the largest Holocaust survivor communities in the country. So this picture is very interesting. We're going to see this Hirsch's knishes come up many, many times. We're going to see like at least 3 photos of Hirsch's knishes. So in this photo, right, as you can see, everything is very kosher. We see the kosher sign. Right, you can get a Frankfurter, hamburger, kosher food that you could find on the beach. And this is a community filled with Jews, many who are the Holocaust survivors. So yeah, this is the last movement before we will see the area change once again. So now we're finally going to get to a little bit of our story, this Russian-speaking Jewish community. So by 1966, there is a change in the Soviet Union when Soviet Premier Alexei Kosygin, he says, I'm going to allow some Soviet Jews to leave only for family reunification purposes. And of course, when he announced this, the first thought was that there would be some Soviet Jews who would go straight to Israel. But NYANA, the New York Association for New Americans, and HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, they heard this. And they said, okay, we're ready to help bring more Soviet Jewish refugees to America. And once again, where do you think NYANA thinks is the best place to put them? Once more, a lot of them want to come to New York because they know New York. They know it's the land of opportunity. And once again, they think Brighton Beach. So at this point, NYANA is the largest Jewish resettlement agency in the country. And what do they set up in Brighton Beach? They give the following: refugee assistance, American Jewish support, English language training, healthcare, and various other Soviet social services. Now, something again to note about the 1970s, where we're seeing a pattern. The 1970s, once again, Brighton Beach has been kind of dilapidated and falling apart once more. Many reasons. By the 1970s, the United States is in economic downturn. New York City is almost on the brink of bankruptcy. So when these Soviet Jews get to Brighton Beach, they do not see a nice picture, right? They see homeless people. They see homeless people on the streets. The beach is filled with pollution. There's non-investors. The shops are falling apart. And any of these Jews who had kind of stayed there and moved up in the social classes had moved out to the suburbs. This is what the kind of scene these Soviet Jews arrived to. But at the same time, they are very excited because a lot of them are from Odessa and they're here once more on the sea, which is where this kind of name is coined, Little Odessa by the sea. So something that's really noted is most of the sources and people themselves who have lived and came to Brighton Beach in the 1970s say that it was a very deteriorated area. It was very dark and depressing, and they had no idea where they had come to. But at the same time, there was a lot of people who were kind of amazed and thrilled by capitalism, and there was a lot of stories of Soviet Jews going into grocery stores and seeing rows of shelves and things they had never seen. But mostly, right, if you know maybe people from the former Soviet Union or know any Soviet Jews, and many times said in articles about the Soviet Jews, is they came with a hustling mentality. So they had a very hard time finding jobs that had the same level of prestige that they may have had in the Soviet Union. So they were looking for work. And a little statistic that between 1975 and 1980, 40,000 arrived to Brighton Beach, which is huge if you think about that, considering it's a little area. And then again, we're going in this picture on the right is a little bit later, but we see now again Hirsch's Knishes, but also on the top we see Cafe Volna. So right, as things are very difficult and they're looking for jobs and they're finding a new life in capitalism, there is, of course, a boom by the late 1970s. Right, so in 1974, we have an article from the New York Times, which is when I start to say these journalists start coming in and reporting on what's going on in this area, especially interesting because these people come from the Soviet Union and it's obviously the Cold War. So we have an article from 1974 titled, Soviet Jews Find Liberty and Problems Here. So it reports that the reason these Soviet Jews had chosen to come to America over Israel is they believe that there's way more economic opportunity. They wanted a more non-religious environment. Many had been mixed couples with one Jewish and non-Jewish parents. They felt that they could understand the culture more in America, but they were really having a hard time finding jobs that match their same level of prestige. And most of all, these people were homesick. So what did they do? Well, they followed the previous generation's advice came with this hustling mentality, and they opened their own business, which is like something that I think is so beautiful in America. This great entrepreneurship that continued throughout Brighton Beach, and that fed them, that fed their families, and continued future generations. So as you see in the picture on the right here, we are going into the late 70s. So we have another article from the New York Times in 1978 titled New Soviet Immigrants Uplift Brighton Beach, describing a journalist who finds vegetable stores filled with sawdusted floors with barrels of Russian-style herring and pickles, and grocery shelves stocked with imported canned vegetables, fish, and meats from the Soviet Union. And then we have even further in 1986, we have an article titled Brighton Beach Facing Climate Change Again, of how we had a dilapidated area, and now there is booming economic prosperity with Soviet Jewish entrepreneurship. The article reports that there were no vacant businesses, there were new condos, and the beach was cleaned nightly to limit any kind of pollution. So overall, we are starting to see the birth of this very ethnic enclave as entrepreneurship empowered Soviet Jews to employ their family members, help other Soviet Jewish refugees in the area, use their business educations, merging American capitalistic values with the culture of their home. And at the same time, they were assimilating. They were learning English, and their kids were going to American schools. And there is a huge recovery in Brighton Beach. So there's entrepreneurship, and there's this connection back to food that's seen everywhere. And then from an interview from a Soviet Jewish immigrant named Natalie Kolbasuk, she states in the article from 1986 that she came to Brighton Beach because she had acquaintances there. They had Russian shops, food, and orchestras from her homeland. And as she was assimilating and struggling, anyways, in American Jewish life, food is mentioned as a prevalent factor as what helped her during this time, and something that they could rely on and count on as they fought for a new American life. And of course, we're going to say they did not just open stores with food. They're going to open everything: bookstores, nightclubs, restaurants, and this is going to go from many, many generations. So as you can see here, great prices back there. We have the pickles and poppy seed cakes and a cute little borscht. So our boom continues. As I mentioned, right, they're going to open even banya houses, bath houses, cafeterias with like a Soviet style cooking, clothing stores, anything you can think of, as they're bringing a lot of their culture from the Soviet Union and using their entrepreneur skills to make it in America. By 1986, they're already opening luxury developments in Brighton Beach. And in another article in the 1980s from the New York Times, a reporter stated, an article called Russian Immigrants Establish New Enclaves in the City. So by 1986, there's 30,000 new immigrants who have arrived to Brighton Beach. This author is especially intrigued because he's, constantly we're going to see these journalists walking around intrigued because he sees the children of a lot of these refugees who are working on getting rid of their Russian accents and trying to fit into American life. But then, of course, he sees these same children, or I guess they're in their 20s, at a Brighton Beach nightclub and restaurant. And this is what he wrote from his experience, that the tables were filled with platters of white fish and red caviar, ribne or sorti, so different kinds of fish, and that the half-empty bottle of vodka on the restaurant tables made the New York nightclub seem closer to Moscow or Kiev than Brighton Beach. So as they were assimilating, they were going back and having their food and going to a nightclub that reminded them of home. As they were, fighting to become American, and it's true entrepreneur capitalistic perception. Now, it was not, everything was not so easy, as we have to, of course, mention that there was already a Jewish population in Brighton Beach when these new Soviet Jews came. Right, if you've met a Soviet Jew, you can probably tell that they have very different perceptions to Judaism and what it needs to be Jewish. So Soviet Jews had grown up in the Soviet Union, where practicing Judaism was forbidden. they were Jewish on their passports. These people were Soviet Jews were very educated city dwellers, which was very different to this synagogue culture, right? That had already dominated Brighton Beach, and Jews who were kosher, and that was their life. They were Orthodox. So many Soviet Jews came, and there was resentment with this American Jewish communities. Right? Many mentioned that they had never seen a Hasidic Jew in their life. And as many Orthodox Jews thought they were so excited to be finally Jewish, they found that it was very difficult to get these Soviet Jews into their synagogues. Just, an interesting statistic for you is that there were 11 synagogues in Brighton Beach in the 1970s, and only 5 attracted any Soviet Jewish refugees. And the ones they attracted were mostly elderly immigrants. And a lot of resentment. This can be, its own presentation about this resentment, as American Jews had donated tens of millions of dollars to assist Soviet Jews. But they found that they did not always felt like they belonged there, or was difficult to welcome them. So a quote that I think really defines this era is, the American Jews wanted them to be humble, traditional Jews of their grandparents' generations, but they had grown up in completely different environments. Right? These people were facing repression of their traditions that had been going on for the last 50 years. One story that I'd like to share that really struck me personally is there was a story about a Soviet Jewish refugee who came to Brighton Beach. He wanted to open his own kosher butcher shop, and he didn't know, obviously, the laws of kashrut. He did not know, right? There's a whole specific way that kosher meat is supposed to be handled. He was walking around and saw that a lot of stores in Brighton Beach that held meat had a kosher symbol. So he opened his own butcher shop, and he wrote that the meat is kosher. And the reason he did that is he thought that since he's Jewish, the meat is automatically kosher. So these are, real stories of how, difficult it was for a lot of these Soviet Jews who were coming to an area that had a very defined Orthodox Jewish culture. Yeah, so that story just like really resonated with me of how difficult it was for them. And in the picture we have here, this is the Jewish Center of Brighton Beach. It was founded in 1914. It really grew during this 1920s golden era, of Judaism. Now we're gonna see it did take a lot of time, but eventually Soviet Jews became more interested in Judaism, as there were some Russian Jewish touches. This synagogue is now home to RAGE, which is the Russian American Jewish Experience. And Chabad now really focuses its work on the Russian-speaking Jewish population in Brighton Beach. So it did take some time. And obviously, right, that once Soviet Jews were interested in incorporating more Jewish traditions into their lives, they brought their food and a lot of things from home with them. So on the left, we have a bar mitzvah, right? As you can see, some of I'm pretty sure we have bacon and all kinds of different kolbaski there, right? Sliced meats, cured meats. Definitely we see shrimp cocktail, but nevertheless, it is a bar mitzvah. So they brought a lot of their traditions from home when they started doing weddings, Brits, you name it. They did it at the Russian restaurant with their own food. Down below, we have some article I found about Russian-speaking Jewish rabbis gathering with a big picture of vodka. So of course, there was a movement of Russian-speaking rabbis there. And even organizations like Cogeco that cater to the Russian-speaking Jewish population. And then once again, as I said, we're back with this pierogi truck now. So this is what has happened. We went from the Knish storefront to Knish with Cafe Tatiana to Soviet Jews realizing that the Knish is actually a pierogi. So there is some start to blend and some fusion and some understanding of Jewish traditions. Now this is obviously not only a happy story, because a lot of Soviet Jews actually came to America and converted to Christianity because they felt that they were more open, and especially there was a movement, a big synagogue, or not synagogue, but a big church for Jews for Jesus, who attracted a lot of Soviet Jews because they were more willing to teach them a lot of traditions. So by 1989, we're already moving into the late 80s. If you know what's going on in the Soviet Union, right, the Soviet Union is kind of on the brinks of collapse, and there are 1 million Jews who want to leave the Soviet Union. Over 90% of them want to go to the United States over than Israel. And of course, the United States panics at this number. That is a huge weight that scares American Jewish communities across America. There's a new policy beginning that you have to now prove that you have been a refugee. And there's, by the 1990s, basically priority is given to those who already have family in the United States, in the pipeline of how Soviet Jews were coming to America. So they're going from Vienna to Rome to the United States. That is closed. So with this number, around 650,000 Soviet Jews go to Israel by 1996 rather than the United States. There is still a big influx that is coming to Brighton Beach from the Soviet Union. The United States puts a max of 50,000 Soviet refugees max in the 1990s. Now, this number is interesting because they don't say Soviet Jewish refugees, they say Soviet refugees. So at this point, Ukrainian Catholics, Ukrainian Orthodox, and evangelical Christians, or anyone who can prove, Armenians, that they were being persecuted in the former Soviet Union's point or Soviet Union, are welcome to come to the United States. And they are also attracted, of course, to this area that is a little, a little Odessa, something that reminds them at home. So as one war wave is moving into the 1990s, the wave that came into the 1970s and even early 1980s is moving out. So we see this article from Brighton Beach to America. The wave of immigrants began 25 years ago. Soon Russian filled the streets. Now the tide is ebbing. So many kind of move out, and right, it's for them a painful area filled with how hard it was for them when they first came to America. And right, they go up the social class. They no longer want to live there. They want to go and live in the suburbs. Right, they want to forget this 1970s and 1980s. They start to send their kids to college. They assimilate. So they move to the suburbs. But they still are going back to Brighton Beach to get a taste of the food and the things that they can't stay away from. So a few interviews from the 1990s. A Russian Jewish woman who was a PhD candidate in the 1990s said that she came to America as a refugee when she was a child. And now she no longer lives in Brighton Beach, but she cannot stay away from the food shops and nightlife. And while she has very much an American education, is getting a PhD, this food of her childhood is a comfort that she relied on. And at the same time, people were moving out to the suburbs, but they were coming back to rent a cottage in Brighton Beach in the 90s. Right, this food is part of their identity and something that stayed with them, and something that even though they may not live in this little enclave, they're still coming back there and buying these goods. And of course, now we got to talk about some fame, or people who really did capitalize on this burst of entrepreneurship and continues. So in 1997, two brothers known as Sam and Edward Schneider, they had a whole fish company known as Royal Seafood Bazaar. They decide, why not open Net Cost Market in 2000 to bring these migrants a taste of home, even if they are no longer in Brighton Beach. So already it's a huge success. By 2002, these brothers already have 3 locations, and right, they are following the movement of Soviet Jews or former Soviet Jews at this point. They expand into Philadelphia and into other boroughs of New York City as they realize that even as people are assimilating, moving out of Brighton, going to the suburbs, they are still coming back for this comfort and taste from home. And they come to New Jersey, all the suburbs there by 2016. And by 2020, they already are delivering delivery. And they're considering, they have a membership now, and they constantly want to open more stores. So what can you find there on the right? This is some photos from Net Cost Market. You can find caviar, all kinds of cured meats and sliced cheeses and all the delicatessen things we spoke about. Every kind of salad covered in mayonnaise, marinated foods, herring, silotka. But it's also very much a grocery store. It's just very catered to those of the former Soviet Union. And then on the left, we have a map of every single net cost market in the East Coast that I know of. And more fame. Okay, so of course I mentioned the nightclubs where again you can get a taste of this very fascinating food we've been talking about. Now you can't just go and eat cafeteria food or store food every day, right? You need to have this special food for celebrations. So this restaurant really is an iconic place. So this restaurant is called Tatiana. Now Tatiana is not an easy person to find. She does not have much information on herself on her website. But Tatiana is a real person. This restaurant was named and opened by Tatiana Varzar, who came to the Brighton Beach in the 1970s. And the original restaurant is truly right on the water, as Tatiana is from Odessa. And it was opened in 1989 and stays still there to this day. You can go tomorrow even, if you're so intrigued. Now, while this club has, stayed to this day, they've definitely been through some difficult times. Definitely rumors that the mafia has been there. And I could only find one instance of an article where it was burned down in 2004. With the gossip that, of course, someone in the business had done it, because at this point in the 2000s, there was quite a lot of competition with such a large population. So if you've ever been to a Russian restaurant, you know it's very different from American nightclub, right? You're dancing, there's a lot of food, and it constantly keeps coming, right? You can just see this picture on the left, that is only one course. And Tatiana especially, she also has belly dancers. There's lots of vodka. There's many salad courses with mayonnaise and meats, smoked fish, and all the songs from the Soviet Union. The New York Times, of course, had to go and check it out, and they quoted it as being, quote, inside a hallucination. And we're gonna see that more than once. And of course, that's not the only one. So just to give you a little chat of every single restaurant there was Odessa, there was Winter Garden, there was Imperator, there was Maspuchin, there was Metropole, there was Primorsky, and many other restaurants who all were there to serve this population, right? Tatiana is really the one that still keeps going. This one we have here is Rasputin, which was, I guess, Tatiana's biggest competitor. They closed in 2012. My parents went there once. They said that there was the most amount of food they've seen in their lives, and I believe them. This guy was definitely a lot of conspiracy about this owner, Rasputin. The owner, Michael Levitt, he had to close it when he was sentenced to jail for 9 years for committing fraud. So it was closed in 2012, and this show made a huge name for itself as it was featured on a reality TV show. Yes, there was a reality TV show about Brighton Beach, which premiered in 2011. It was a 12-episode series about, I'm not sure what. Here it is, Russian dolls. They wanted to make it like a Jersey Shore, but of Brighton Beach, or another, I guess, Real Housewives. Now, I did watch 10 minutes of a show for research purposes. It did not do well on the air. There was less than 1 million viewers and the first episode, and it was canceled after one season. It's a lot of women who have a lot of superficial problems, a lot of hard relationship with their parents, a lot of partying. And interestingly enough, they constantly were calling themselves Russians, even though I don't think any of these Russian dolls were technically from Russia. And again, for research purposes, we're gonna watch 2 minutes of one. If I'm okay, let me know if you can hear it.
What's that? No idea what it is. I'm not a fruit person. No? No. You don't like papaya? No. I love it. I want to ask Sveta how to deal with Boris, considering she could be a very tough cookie herself. Okay, you know, this week, 1001 Night should be opening. This is the very first time I'm singing. I'm a little nervous, and I even was singing to my Shura. В мире, где кружится снег шальной. You want me to sing one? She's probably thinking crazy mama, but okay, you can sing. You can do anything you want. I'm not a good singer, you know. Boris told you that. He's my coach at this moment. Sometimes he's a little aggressive. He looks on them like Russian KGB. Watch you. Russian men like to be in control, and Renata is softer, but
So yes, you can find all of the episodes online for free. They're all pretty similar, but I just thought this one was interesting, right? Because one second. Where did they decide to film and talk? They're inside their, this Russian store. They're showing all these goods, and they're speaking in English, and they're clearly in some ways assimilated to American life. But yet once again, they're coming for these goods. And again, they're talking about a new Russian restaurant that's opening. Okay, 1 second. Now I need to share this going on. Okay, so to continue. And there's more because, not just Netcost Market moved from Brighton Beach, but Tatiana came to Miami and opened a branch there. So why stop on Brighton Beach if you can have the same fun in Florida on vacation, or as a lot of Jews from the former Soviet Union started to migrate down to Florida or buy a second vacation home in Florida as they assimilated? Tatiana said, I need to go there. So she opened her restaurant in New Year's Eve in 2006. Interestingly enough, while the name is still Tatiana, the restaurant was given to manage by Tatiana's daughter, Karina. So again, we see that entrepreneurship kind of passed down. Now, this restaurant is definitely different from her restaurant in Brighton Beach. This one is not on the water. It's in a strip mall. If you're not looking for it, you won't find it. I've been there a couple times actually. And it's right next to Sunny Isles Beach, which we could do our own presentation on Sunny Isles Beach, which is also a bit like a Brighton. There's also many Russian stores there. But this is a fancy place, right? When you walk in, you see pictures of Tatiana with people like Donald Trump, Henry Kissinger, and Mickey Rourke. Now, the menu has over 300 items, and there is very much a cabaret show, as you see on the left, and there was even a tiger. And the tiger, of course, was petitioned to be out of the show in 2015, as a lot of people were concerned about the health of the tiger. And yeah, if anybody's been there, I'd love to hear your experience there. And yeah, she also has Fabergé egg glasses. Okay. So that really kind of leads us to today and how Brighton is now changing. So now we have a new wave of those who are still coming from the former Soviet Union, but they are not necessarily Jews anymore. We see a new wave of those from Kazakhstan, Georgia, Uzbekistan. Once again, they hear about this neighborhood, right? The Jews heard about this neighborhood and other Jews, and now we have people from the former Soviet Union who heard that other former Soviet Union people are there. And they once more are following the same ideas of everyone else who came there. making their own entrepreneurship. A little bit different. That's different from other movements we've seen, and the changing of this neighborhood is these people are non-Jewish. They're opening halal markets. So rather than being kosher, they're Muslim. There's a new Muslim identity. A big one that stands kind of to this day and has its own, I guess, fame is Tashkent Market, which opened in 2017, right after Uzbekistan. If you haven't been to Tashkent Market, maybe how it's a little bit different is, right, there's more goods that are focused on the Caucasus. So you'll find more things like langmen noodles, samsa, and of course giant plovs and a lot of garlic. And you'll find this one I thought would be interesting for everyone, fantasy salad, which is a salad made of chicken, mayonnaise, beets, underneath a bedazzled roof of pomegranate seeds. But at the same time, Tashkent Market did their research. They know who's coming back to Brighton Beach for this taste. Right, you can find every kind of marinated pickles, anything like that. All kinds of Soviet salads, layered salads, things with anything with mayonnaise, same kind of fish, but also things like pumpkin mante, pumpkin dumplings. And they too have kind of their own fame, like Netcast Market. They have over 4 more locations, and they are apparently opening in Manhattan with their newest development, which costs apparently over $18 million. And here it is on the left in West 4th. I don't know if it's, I think I've seen that they're trying to open this location for over a year. If anybody knows if they're going to open, I couldn't find anything on the internet. I'd love to hear if anybody knows. But right, they also have their own fame. And just again, some other things you can find there. That's a new mix, right? You can find caviar, smoked fish, meat jelly, холодец, and pirshki. But you can also find things like Turkish food that is also coming to Brooklyn. Things like shawarma, also baklava. And again, if none of those things appeal to you, you can find sesame chicken. Now we're gonna watch a small clip from a video that was made by some Columbia students who were, again, fascinated like me by Brighton Beach and made their own little video. This is from 2012, just checking, about this change.
Hosting a celebration of the liberation of Odessa in 1944. The guests are members of the neighborhood's dominant ethnic community, Jewish immigrants from the former Soviet Union. Soviet Jews first began coming in the 1970s after the Soviet government first granted them permission to emigrate. Tatiana Lebedinskaya was one of the early arrivals.
Listen, why we left Russia? Because some people doesn't love Jews, right?
She arrived in 1979 from Moscow, part of the first wave of immigrants. She has since become a fixture of the Brighton Beach community as a poet, singer, songwriter, and adult education teacher.
We call it Little Odessa because a lot of people from Odessa come to Brighton because it was very, related to their soul, the spirit, because they live nearby Black Sea. Here they live nearby Atlantic Ocean.
Valerie Savinkin, head of the Odessa Association of New York, is one of these.
We have tens of thousands residents in Brighton Beach area and generally in Brooklyn who came from that same city that I came here, Odessa.
But the face of the neighborhood is changing. Since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, an influx of non-Jewish Russian speakers from former Soviet states has altered the ethnic and cultural composition of the area.
My name is Ikram. I'm from Tashkent. I arrived today. So far, I like it. I'm here for a couple of months. Then we'll see.
Thousands of newcomers from the Central Asian states have made the area home in the last decade. Ilham Kandrabayev came to the U.S. from the Fergana Valley in Uzbekistan and has lived in Brighton Beach for 8 years. In the last 2, he's operated several media outlets for the Central Asian community, including a television channel, News TV.
Brighton Beach – это маленький Советский Союз.
Brighton Beach is a little Soviet Union. You walk in and the signs are all in Russian. Pharmacy, all kinds of stores. It's great to see it because you're in America and everything's in English. And then you see these signs. It's closer to home. I feel good seeing them.
Ilhom's mother, Mubarak, is a former teacher of Russian literature in Uzbekistan.
Я удивилась, что
I was surprised that here there are probably 80% Russian speakers. They are everywhere, especially in Brighton.
Ilhom, always looking to expand his audience, decided he would capitalize on this fact.
Вначале я на узбекском языке делал.
At first, I did everything in Uzbek. Then I thought, people who come here from Uzbekistan, it's not just Uzbeks. There are also Tajiks, Kyrgyz, Azaris, Armenians who don't understand Uzbek. So I added Russian.
Добавил русский язык.
Many of the newer immigrants are integrating well into the community and attracting the attention of longtime residents.
Now, about 80% of my student is from Uzbekistan, from city Samarkand. I don't know why, but everybody born from this city, it's a lot of them.
But the older Jewish immigrants seem happy to share their turf with the new arrivals. They speak Russian after all. The Soviet Union may no longer exist, but its peoples remain bound by the Russian language. Or maybe it's something different altogether that draws people here.
The biggest attraction is our boardwalk. So beautiful, right? Солнце в небе завертелось.
So, as you can see, Brighton Beach is once more changing it again, but very much keeping this very, very, Russian character, our Russian language, as we'll see. Another very interesting restaurant, right, in Russian, at your mother-in-law, which is a fusion of Korean Uzbek food. So we see this area changing, but still very much taking this Russian language as a way to connect the area. Of course, there was definitely a bit of an identity change when when Ukraine was invaded by Russia. And as we can see, the community of Brighton Beach really came out and was very supportive of Ukraine. And their store, known before as Taste of Russia, after the invasion, they took down the sign and they just put a Ukrainian flag. So even though everybody speaks Russian and that is something that is connecting them from the former Soviet Union, they don't necessarily identify as Russian, but all these different identities, and rather, Russian is a language that they can work on their entrepreneurship and capitalize. And I would say overall that this Russian identity, this Russian language is still a Russian speaking character, something that will continue for decades. There was a sociologist by the name of Steve Gold who came and studied Brighton Beach in the 1990s. So before a lot of these new immigrants came from Uzbekistan. And in his opinion, he said that it could take decades to get rid of this Russian speaking character. And as we see, it continues, right? You go into any store, at least somebody usually speaks Russian, but they absolutely are most likely not from Russia. And just a little statistic is that there are still about 123,000 Russian speakers in Brooklyn. But this area has definitely been very affected by the Jewish population, this population of Jews who had survived the Holocaust. And this is something that's going to stand as a testament to Brooklyn, right? In 1994, there was this construction of a Holocaust park. Now, this is on the border of Brighton Beach and Sheepshead Bay. And this is the only public Holocaust park actually in New York City. And it was finished in 1997. And right, something to note about Brighton Beach is that, yes, we spoke about this population that had survived the Holocaust and came in the 1950s or late 1940s, but also many Holocaust survivors were actually Jews themselves who had fought on the sides of the Soviet and had liberated Jews. They're also in Brighton Beach. So this is like two different kinds of populations who all mixed up in Brighton Beach. So very interesting. So lastly, that really leads us more to today. So just like the New York Times were coming in the 1970s, if you Google Brighton Beach, you will most likely find some sort of guide or foodie networks, especially people like Thrillist, Eater, who are coming to Brighton Beach. Many times they're calling something out of a trip. in many ways trying to make it seem cool or hipster, right? People are spending the day in the boardwalk and telling you what kind of food to eat. And go to a Russian bookstore, go try something new and try a banya. But overall, we have this nostalgia. Something that when people go there, and maybe of course they haven't been there years, or they only go there for certain goods, there's something that stays there with them as they have assimilated and changed. So our end, right? What do we make of all this? There's something so powerful in nostalgia, in this food from the former Soviet Union. And as these people were coming and making a brand new lives for themselves in the United States, Brighton Beach was there and helped them remind them of home. It gave a huge sense of entrepreneurship, opportunity, and something that I think is so special about America. Continues to be very much a Russian-speaking area, maybe less, especially now, less of a Jewish area, but still a Russian-speaking area. And something we saw a movement as more waves came in, another wave left, and a new wave came in, another wave left. So if we do this presentation, maybe in 5 years, could be completely something different. Okay, that is everything. And I have, of course, just some photos from 2012, 13 that I wanted to share. Right, there's just something nostalgic in all these photos. So I would love to hear everyone else's thoughts. Or experiences on Brighton Beach.